Ever wondered why we yawn all day, but dream of changing the world in a major way? It's the Bored and Ambitious Show.
Every phone, every computer, every spark of artificial intelligence, all of it, trace back to 8 rebels in a California garage. Pick up a handful of sand. Let it fall through your fingers. You're holding the second most abundant element in Earth's crust and the foundation of a $500 billion industry. Silicon. Refined, purified, etched with circuits too small to see. It becomes the most valuable substance humanity has ever created. More precious than gold, more powerful than oil. But turning sand into thought, that required something rare, genius, rebellion, and one very, very bad boss. December 1956, Stockholm. William Shockley steps forward to receive the Nobel Prize in Physics, the man who taught sand to think. At Bell Labs, he'd co-invented the transistor, a tiny switch that would replace the vacuum tube and change everything. Now, he had bigger plans. Shockley moved to Mountain View, California, a quiet orchard town where land was cheap and the future was unwritten. He founded Shockley Semiconductor and sent letters to the brightest young physicists in America. "Come west," he told them. "Come build the future." They came, full of ambition, full of hope. They had no idea what awaited them. William Shockley could see what others couldn't. At Bell Labs, he'd helped crack the fundamental problem of electronics, how to amplify signals without vacuum tubes that burned out, shattered, consumed power like small furnaces. The transistor was his answer, a sliver of germanium that could think. It would win him the Nobel Prize. It would change everything. But brilliance has a shadow. Shockley didn't just believe he was the smartest person in the room. He needed everyone else to know it, and to suffer for being less. It started with a scratch, a minor injury in the lab, a technician cut on a piece of equipment, an accident, nothing more. But Shockley didn't believe in accidents. He believed in enemies. Within days, he demanded polygraph tests for everyone. Picture it. Scientists with doctorates from MIT, Stanford, Caltech, men who'd been recruited as the best minds in physics, strapped to chairs, wires on their chests, asked if they were saboteurs. The lie detector needles scratched back and forth. Shockley watched from behind glass. He was hunting for traitors. He was creating them. Years later, one of the 8 would put it simply, Shockley was a genius at physics, but he was also a genius at making it impossible to do physics. The decision didn't happen in a single moment. It built, meeting by meeting, humiliation by humiliation, until walking away felt less like betrayal and more like survival. They weren't quitting a job. They were escaping a trap. Robert Noyce moved through rooms like he owned them, even when he didn't. Charismatic, fearless, the kind of man who could convince you to bet your career on a handshake. Gordon Moore was his opposite, quiet, methodical, a mind that saw patterns hidden in chaos. Where Noyce inspired, Moore calculated. Where Noyce leaped, Moore measured the distance first. Separately, they were brilliant. Together, they were unstoppable. One would become the face of an industry. The other would define its trajectory with a single observation. Neither knew it yet, but they were about to change everything. September 1957. 8 men gather after hours, not in a boardroom, but in a home, curtains drawn, voices low. They are planning something that polite society calls betrayal. Each has reached the same conclusion. Shockley's brilliance cannot save them from Shockley's paranoia. So, they make a pact. Leave together. Start fresh. Build something where trust isn't a weakness. It's the foundation. A single dollar bill moves around the table. One by one, they sign. 8 signatures, $1, no lawyers, no fine print. Just names, written in ink, sealed by trust. Each signature was a career wagered, a reputation risked, a future mortgaged on a belief that together they could build what alone they could only dream. This crumpled bill would become Silicon Valley's founding document. The newspapers would call them the Traitorous Eight. The word was meant to sting. It didn't, because traitors look backward, and these men were already building tomorrow. They didn't just build a new company, they built a new kind of company. At Fairchild, engineers received something unheard of: stock options. A stake in the future they were building. No reserved parking, no corner offices. First names only. If you had an idea, you walked straight to Noyce's desk and said so. The ties came off. The doors stayed open. While the rest of corporate America ran on hierarchy and protocol, Fairchild ran on trust, talent, and a radical bet that the people who build the future should own a piece of it. Before Noyce's breakthrough, building electronics meant this: thousands of components, transistors, resistors, capacitors, each wired together by hand. Slow, expensive, and every hand-soldered connection was a failure waiting to happen. Then Robert Noyce asked a dangerous question. What if we stopped connecting components and started printing them, all of them, on a single sliver of silicon? No wires, no assembly, just light, chemistry, and geometry, creating circuits too small for human hands to touch. One chip, complete. The integrated circuit didn't just make electronics smaller, it made the impossible affordable. And affordable meant everywhere. And then they left, not in defeat, in multiplication. Engineers who'd learned the Fairchild way walked out those open doors and started companies of their own. 30 firms, 40, more. They called them the Fairchildren. National Semiconductor, AMD, and in 1968, Intel. In a what Shockley built with fear, they rebuilt with freedom. And freedom, it turns out, is contagious. The Valley's defining trait was born right here. Leave, build, repeat. Every departure a new beginning, every exit an entrance. In 1965, Gordon Moore sat down with a pencil and a question. He charted every chip Fairchild had built, counting transistors, marking dates. The numbers told a story. Every 2 years, engineers were cramming twice as many transistors onto silicon. Moore didn't call it a law. He called it a challenge. He published his observation in Electronics magazine, almost daring the industry. Can we keep this going? It wasn't physics. It wasn't prophecy. It was something more dangerous, a bet that human ingenuity had no ceiling. The industry heard Moore's dare and answered it. Chip companies began planning 2 years out, then 5, then 10. Product roadmaps synchronized to a rhythm no one had mandated, but everyone obeyed. 1971, 2,000 transistors. 1975, 6,000. 1980, 30,000. The numbers climbed like a fever chart. Miss the target and your competitor wouldn't. Fall behind one cycle and you might never catch up. What began as an observation hardened into obligation. Engineers didn't ask if they could double transistor counts. They asked how. The dare became a deadline. The deadline became an industry heartbeat. And for 60 years, that heart never skipped a beat. Every 2 years, physics said no. Every 2 years, engineers said, watch us. Heat threatened to melt chips into uselessness. They invented new cooling. Light wavelengths became too large to print smaller circuits. They bent the light. Quantum effects made electrons unpredictable at atomic scales. They redesigned the transistor itself. Wall after wall rose up. Wall after wall came down, not through luck, through relentless collaborative brilliance. Thousands of engineers across dozens of companies, competing fiercely and sharing freely, united by a single impossible target. They didn't break the laws of physics. They found the loopholes. 1968. Noyce and Moore do what Silicon Valley will learn to call inevitable. They leave. Walk away from Fairchild, the company they built from nothing. This is the pattern now. The template. Leave, innovate, multiply. They call the new venture Intel. Their target, memory chips. Faster, smaller, better ways to store information. They have no idea what they're actually about to find. 1971. A chip smaller than a fingernail. Inside it, 2,300 transistors. This is the Intel 4004, and it changes everything. 20 years earlier, a computer with this power filled an entire warehouse. ENIAC. 30 tons of vacuum tubes and wiring tended by technicians around the clock. Now, hold it between your thumb and forefinger. A general-purpose computer. Not designed for one task, but programmable for any task. The room became a cabinet. The cabinet became a chip. The engineers at Intel hadn't just shrunk computing, they had compressed the future into something you could lose in your pocket. For the first time in history, computing didn't have to mean governments, corporations, institutions with budgets measured in millions. The microprocessor meant something radical. Computing could be personal, a tool not just for the powerful, but for the curious, the creative, the ordinary person with an extraordinary idea. Every hand that would ever touch a keyboard, swipe a screen, ask a question of a machine. This moment made them possible. 1971. 2,300 transistors, small enough to fit on a fingernail. Revolutionary. 1989. 1 million. The number becomes abstract, impossible to picture. 2006. 1 billion. 1,000 millions. Packed into something you could lose in your pocket. And today, 100 billion transistors on a single chip. More switches than there are stars in the Milky Way, crammed into a sliver of silicon thinner than a human hair. This is what exponential means. Not gradual progress, not steady improvement. Doubling, and doubling, and doubling again until the numbers lose all meaning and only the miracles remain. Here is where physics starts to sound like poetry. A modern transistor is smaller than a virus, smaller than the wavelength of visible light itself. Think about that. The light we use to see cannot see what we have built. And yet, engineers print these circuits using light. Light too big to draw lines this fine. They found ways around the laws of optics, tricks of refraction, masks within masks. Frequencies pushed to the ultraviolet edge. They did not break physics. They negotiated with it. The impossible became routine. Twice a year, every year, for 60 years. And from this curve, everything. The personal computer, the smartphone in your pocket, the internet that rewired civilization, the artificial intelligence now learning to think, every screen, every search, every connection, downstream from transistors, doubling in a California lab. But here is where the story turns. These miracles don't make themselves. Someone builds them, somewhere. And that somewhere has become the most important place on Earth. Every supply chain has a choke point. Ours is an island. Taiwan, 100 miles from mainland China, produces 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. One company, one island, TSMC, every iPhone in your pocket, every NVIDIA chip training artificial intelligence, every advanced processor powering the modern world. The supply lines all converge here, pulsing like arteries toward a single vulnerable heart. What 8 rebels built in California now depends on a factory in Hsinchu. To print circuits this small, you need light that doesn't exist in nature. Enter ASML, a Dutch company that builds the most complex machines humanity has ever created. Each one weighs 180 tons. Each one costs $380 million. Inside, a tiny droplet of molten tin is vaporized 50,000 times per second by a laser, generating extreme ultraviolet light, wavelengths so short they can etch features smaller than a virus, smaller than physics should allow. There are only a few hundred of these machines on Earth. Without them, the semiconductor industry stops completely. One earthquake, one typhoon, one blockade, and the arteries go dark. The modern world, built on silicon, balanced on a knife's edge. We engineered miracles into grains of sand. We forgot to engineer redundancy. The chip that started in a garage is now a matter of survival. In 1965, Gordon Moore made an observation, almost a provocation. Transistor counts could double every 2 years. The industry heard it as a challenge, and for 60 years, they answered. Every generation faced its limit: quantum tunneling, heat death, the wavelength of light itself. Every generation found a door marked impossible and walked through it anyway. Not because physics changed, because engineers refused to stop asking, what if we tried it differently? The semiconductor industry runs on one inexhaustible resource: audacity. When physics says no, engineers don't argue. They ask a different question. They bend light. They tunnel through barriers. They make atoms behave. From slide rules to artificial intelligence. The tools change, but the spirit doesn't. It's the same stubborn optimism that made 8 scientists walk out of a laboratory in 1957 and bet everything on sand. Look around. Every photograph you've ever taken lives on silicon. Every GPS coordinate guiding you home. Every song streaming through your earbuds. Surgeons see inside your body because chips translate flesh into light. Spacecraft navigate by processors calculating trajectories 1,000,000 times per second. The artificial intelligence writing code, composing music, decoding proteins, all of it runs on the architecture 8 rebels sketched in a California garage. This is the invisible infrastructure of modern existence. You can't see it, you can't touch it, but take it away, and the 21st century goes dark. Remember their faces: Robert Noyce, Gordon Moore, Julius Blank, Victor Greenwich, Jean Herney, Eugene Kleiner, Jay Last, Sheldon Roberts, 8 scientists who refused to suffer a brilliant tyrant. They didn't just invent a new kind of chip. They invented a new kind of company where turbulent ideas mattered more than hierarchy, where engineers owned what they built, where the garage could change the world. The press called them traitors. History calls them founders. Their mutiny became our inheritance. Hold a grain of sand to the light. Silica, the second most common element in Earth's crust. Ordinary, overlooked, worthless, until human ingenuity refined it, printed it, stacked it with circuits so impossibly small they number more than the stars in the Milky Way. A grain of sand now holds a galaxy of switches. The most audacious bet in history, that transistors could shrink forever, is still paying off, every 2 years, for 60 years, and counting. In 1957, 8 rebels walked out of a building in Mountain View. They carried nothing but an idea, that the future would be measured in silicon. Every microchip on Earth, in your phone, your car, your hospital, your sky, descends from that act of defiance. The chip that ate the world is still hungry. And the impossible? It becomes routine. Every 2 years.